News with Frank Reynolds. Tonight, reports from State Department correspondent John Skelly, White House correspondent Bill Gill, and Pentagon correspondent Bill Downs on speculation of a bombing pause. Lou Cioffi and Ted Koppel on the reaction from presidential candidates. Jules Bergman on the flight of Apollo 7. And tonight's guest commentary by Bill Moyers on the importance of quiet diplomacy. Now, here is Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. This has been a day of swiftly spreading rumors, high hopes, but as yet, no serious breakthrough to peace. From Saigon, Paris, and Washington have come reports of diplomatic activity possibly leading to an end to the bombing of North Vietnam. The reports were so persistent that at mid-morning, the White House issued a brief statement saying there has been no basic change in the situation, no breakthrough. Later, President Johnson took the highly unusual step of arranging a conference telephone call with all three presidential candidates to inform them simultaneously of the White House statement. The speculation was touched off in part by the news that Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker in Saigon had conferred 3 times during the day with South Vietnam's President Thieu. South Vietnamese officials, who declined to be identified, said the 2 men discussed a bombing halt. American and North Vietnamese negotiators met again in Paris today, and though both sides later said there had been no progress, one American spokesman said there has been movement. Despite the White House insistence on no basic change in the situation, the feeling persists that something is in the works. And we have asked John Skelly, our diplomatic correspondent, and Bill Gill, our White House man, to join us tonight and talk about the possibility of a breakthrough to peace. Gentlemen, I would like to ask you both, do you believe there is substance to all these reports, or are they merely products of our wishful imagination? John?
Frank, I do believe there is considerable substance to what's happening right now. I think we're on the edge of perhaps a climactic breakthrough in the Vietnamese discussions, one that could end the bombing and point the way to serious peace talks. But it is also clear to me that there is a last-minute hang-up somewhere, and how long it's going to take to resolve that is unclear at this moment.
Bill?
Frank, I think that we've been moving toward some substantive development in the Paris peace talks now for the last 2 weeks or so. And I think that we came very close to having that development announced, but something may have gone awry, and it simply may have been a premature leak, possibly an unfortunate leak, but I do believe that we are moving in the direction of a bombing halt.
John, you speak of a last-minute hang-up. Where is this likely to be, in Paris or possibly in Saigon? You think the South Vietnamese are resisting?
My understanding is that it's not so much the South Vietnamese who were objecting at the last moment to the idea of a discontinuation of the American bombing, but the North Vietnamese and the kind of assurances that are required from them as a price for the end of the bombing. Mr. Johnson, you recall, said that he would not end the bombing until he was certain that there would not be additional danger for the American troops up north near the demilitarized zone. Well, in the past 2 weeks, there has been a considerable fall-off in military activity, including a pullback of some of the military units along the DMZ. Now, this presumably makes those American troops a bit safer. But as I understand it, we want some additional assurances, namely that there would be an end to terrorist attacks on the cities, and that the talks could then broaden to include the South Vietnamese government.
Well, why, really, have the North Vietnamese changed their minds, changed their policy, if indeed they have? Is it possible that they would prefer to negotiate with President Johnson in the remaining months of his office, rather than, say, Mr. Nixon, who appears to be the next president at this point?
There is a very strong assumption that that is true. The North Vietnamese are believed capable of reading the political happenings here at home. They know Richard Nixon's background, and many White House officials believe that they would conclude automatically that Richard Nixon would be tougher to deal with as president than a Lyndon Johnson in the last months of his administration, who would want to go down in the history books as a man who at least moved a great direction toward peace. And it's for this reason that there has been this air of expectation that the North Vietnamese finally, now being convinced that the president was not going to give them a bombing halt for nothing, would be prepared to give something themselves.
Bill, is the president at all concerned about the charge of politics being flung at him? Here we are just a few weeks away from the election.
Yes, I think he is concerned about the possibilities of being charged with political motives, although I don't think that it's going to control any decision. And I think he's shown that, because it had been projected that if he were going to move toward a bombing halt or anything that he might have hoped to achieve that would affect an election, he would have to do it before the second week in October. We're now at the 16th of October, and I don't think that that is going to be the controlling factor. However, of course, he will be expecting, rightfully so, to be accused by the opposition of playing politics unless he can display the fact that he had some indication or some reason to believe that there would be a de-escalation.
I see. Thank you very much, gentlemen. We sincerely hope that you're both right in your expectations that we are on the verge of a possible breakthrough. And apart from the diplomatic activity now underway, there are also indications of a possible change in military activity in Vietnam. ABC's Pentagon correspondent Bill Downs has that story in Washington.
Today's MAC-V communique from Saigon has produced one of the most significantly puzzling developments of the war. The revelation that for the past 24 hours there has not been a single ground action anywhere in South Vietnam involving American troops. It's a most remarkable development considering that U.S. warplanes made more than 200 airstrikes above and below the DMZ yesterday. Other puzzling developments this fall has been the pullback of 2 North Vietnamese divisions in the I Corps area north of the demilitarized zone. Also, a large part of the 9th North Vietnamese Division has disappeared from the Saigon area, presumably into Cambodia. However, there have been no solid evidence that Hanoi has cleared out of the demilitarized zone itself. But there are signs that the communists may be trying to establish a line of heavy artillery installations just north of the truce line. Big Russian long-range guns capable of firing over and beyond the 6-mile-wide strip. The United States already has 175-millimeter self-propelled guns south of the DMZ, and reportedly more of these monsters will be sent to bolster the Marines there. This could be most significant, for if the truce zone is truly demilitarized, then both sides would be prepared to preserve its neutrality. Bill Downs, ABC News, the Pentagon.
In a moment, Bill Moyers talks about rumors, speculation, and diplomacy.
One day, the Jolly Green Giant sent word through the valley, "I do not choose to run."
That's okay, Giant. There's no election.
But the giant was referring to his new butter sauce that clings. It comes on his frozen Niblets brand corn.
Oh, boy, this tastes better than ever. You should run for something, Giant.
Not a chance. You see, in other years, Niblets corn lost some of its butter sauce in the runoff. But his new butter sauce that clings, well, it stands 4 square for flavor and never runs. You get corn and butter on the same fork.
You want better tasting corn? Yeah! Do you want the flavor tight cooking pouch? Yeah! Do you want more butter flavor? Yeah!
And why don't you walk, don't run, to the store and get Green Giant brand Niblets corn, or any of his other good things from the garden, frozen in his new butter sauce that clings.
Choose the one that doesn't run. Ho, ho.
At the Hambletonian Beauty Spa, one of the most exclusive beauty spas in the country, some of the most celebrated women in the world pay over $500 a week to be basted in strawberry cream. Molded, rolled, and whipped into shape. They get the most personalized beauty care in the world. But to soften hands at the Hambletonian, they use Jergens lotion. The same Jergens lotion you can buy, because nothing at any price can soften hands like Jergens. Maybe that's why more women soften their hands with Jergens than the next 6 lotions put together. And now the soft one has added even more softeners. Now there's a soap with enough softness to wear the name Jergens. If you like Jergens lotion, you'll love Jergens Lotion Mild Soap at a very mild price.
Despite the attempts by the White House to deflate the bombing halt rumors, there were other significant reports today. In Canberra, Australian Prime Minister John Gorton said, quote, it may be the United States will be making a statement soon. There have been other reports from so-called diplomatic sources of an impending breakthrough at the Paris peace talks, but diplomatic sources, like others, sometimes let their hopes get in the way of facts. And sometimes this can destroy whatever fragile chance there is for diplomatic agreement. Further thoughts now from ABC guest commentator Bill Moyers.
The country and the world are hungry for the tiniest morsel of optimism about an end to the war in Vietnam. The slightest deviation from normal behavior in Paris, Saigon, Washington, or Hanoi triggers speculation of the most intense and optimistic kind. When facts are scarce, rumors abound, and today the rumors are hotter than campaign oratory. It is well to remember that at this moment they are only rumors. We have heard before the cries of peace, peace, when there was no peace. Something may be up, but experience and prudence restrain us from excessive anticipation. There is pressure on the White House to tell us what, if anything, is up. Some people are not happy because the president's spokesman was so uninformative this morning. But he was right, and they were wrong. There are times when a president, even at the risk of appearing to hide the facts, must remain quiet. Ending the war in Vietnam is going to be more difficult than starting it. It will be all the more difficult in the open than in private, at the negotiating table, and in the cable traffic that flows from capital to capital. Secrecy is anathema in democracy, but necessary in diplomacy. We have reached a point in the Vietnam talks where the most important factor may be the ability of one side to believe that the other will be discreet. A premature disclosure or an optimistic word rightly intended but wrongly interpreted can destroy the good faith on which delicate negotiations are built. They can also raise hopes when none exist. It is hard not to know, not to have some encouraging word about the negotiations. But if we expect a blow-by-blow account or an official comment upon a rumor we want to believe even when we shouldn't, we are expecting what ought not to be. For diplomacy is like film. If exposed, it can curl up and die. This is Bill Moyers.
Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon are campaigning in Missouri today, Humphrey in St. Louis, Nixon in Kansas City. The ABC correspondents who were traveling along, Lou Chaffee with Mr. Humphrey, Ted Koppel with Mr. Nixon, report on their candidates' reaction to today's peace rumors. First, correspondent Chaffee.
Vice President Humphrey is continuing his campaigning here in Missouri, despite the fact that he's obviously suffered a political disappointment. A disappointment because the White House did not do as expected and announce an end to the bombing of North Vietnam. Vice President Humphrey inherited the Vietnam War as an issue which has hurt him in this campaign. And he would also right now like to inherit the first move towards peace in this campaign to help him where he really needs help. The Vice President got the word when he went to the Christian Brothers College in St. Louis, Missouri. He was immediately called into a conference call with the White House, and the nearest telephone, oddly enough, happened to be in the men's room in the school auditorium. 20 minutes later, he came out. He looked thoughtful and solemn, and he said, this is no time to make statements, especially in a situation which he called very serious. This is Lou Chaffee with the Humphrey campaign in St. Louis, Missouri.
The rippling of the rumor mills in Paris, Saigon, and Washington has, of course, reached Richard Nixon. But there has been, and there will be, no official reaction today. First of all, Richard Nixon does not respond to unconfirmed rumors, especially not on Vietnam. Secondly, Nixon receives his most accurate information on Vietnam from the Johnson administration itself. Indeed, he received a phone call from President Johnson just this morning, and he would be open to the most serious charges of irresponsibility were he to react publicly on the basis of that information. Thirdly, the possibility of a bombing halt and the peace talks that might follow thereafter would be a tremendous shot in the arm to the Humphrey campaign. Nixon's advisors believe quite confidently that they would win the election nevertheless, but they do not believe that there is anything to be gained now from responding to a potential problem before it takes on its final shape. This is Ted Koppel, ABC News, with the Nixon campaign.
George Wallace was campaigning in New Mexico when the president called him today about a possible bombing halt. Wallace told newsmen, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen, campaigning for re-election in Chicago, was asked if he believes that a halt to the bombing and genuine peace talks in Paris might help the Republicans.
It's not going to hurt us.
Why?
Is this an election,
Senator? Is this a gimmick?
It could be, and I have an idea that the public will regard it as something of a gimmick. Although I'm earnestly interested in any kind of progress that can be made in this field. After all, you're playing with blood.
So, why do you say that the Republican chances would not be hurt if there is...
Well, why should they be?
It'll be a Democratic peace talk.
I know. But look how long we've been at it, and we should have wound this up before now. I don't think you'll get too much credit by coming along at the last minute, 2 weeks before election.
Senator,
because I think people will look down their noses a little and suspect.
In a moment, a report on how the presidential candidates stand now after a nationwide poll taken by ABC political experts.
In our last episode, glamorous Sheila Smith had become the favorite model of handsome Hal Martin. To Hal, Sheila was just another photogenic face. Then, one day, Sheila took up with Life's Stride shoes.
Miss Smith, there's something about you that's different.
Is that bad?
With Sheila's second pair of Life Strides.
Sheila, you're moving.
How about that?
As today's episode begins...
My dear, how would you like to pose in a wedding gown?
What have I done to deserve this?
Has Sheila Smith tempted fate with Life Stride shoes? Has the march of her career ended at the altar? Well, where there's Life Stride, there's hope. For the nearest place to buy Life Stride shoes, dial direct free, area code 800-243-0355.
ABC political editor Bill Lawrence reports that as of now, it looks as though Richard Nixon will win the presidential race by a landslide electoral college vote. 270 electoral college votes are needed for election. A new poll by ABC political analysts and reporters in all 50 states and the District of Columbia projects Mr. Nixon as the winner in 35 states with 382 electoral college votes. George Wallace ahead in 5 states with 45 electoral votes, and Vice President Humphrey leading in 4 states and the District of Columbia with a total of 42 electoral college votes. 6 states with a total of 69 electoral votes are shown in the poll to be question marks, just too close for the experts to call at this time. Apollo 7 passed the halfway mark today on the 11-day space journey. ABC science editor Jules Bergman reports.
This is your captain speaking. You can unfasten your seatbelts and relax, and we'll make your flight enjoyable. Well, with those opening words, Apollo 7 Commander Wally Schirra and his co-pilots Don Isley and Walt Cunningham got today's installment of their orbiting TV roadshow underway. First act, preparing meals in orbit. Cunningham added water from the cold water spigot to a plastic bag packed with powdered fruit juice. You knead it a bit in your hands, get it started twirling, then let it go. The bag is weightless like the astronauts themselves, and space gives you a weightless mixmaster automatically blending the juice. The astronauts then demonstrated how things work aboard Apollo 7, which Schirra calls a first-class spacemobile. It's not all that spacious. The wide-angle lens makes it appear bigger than it is, but Apollo is roomy and, as we now know, very livable. As Apollo 7 heads into its 6th day in orbit, it's still functioning flawlessly on the most incredibly perfect first manned flight any spacecraft has ever had. The astronauts' colds are clearing up, and the space agency has learned a hard lesson. The colds could just as easily have been fever or pneumonia. The flight might have been cut short. On a lunar flight, the astronauts would have been beyond quickly getting back to Earth. And a lunar flight can't be done without all 3 pilots in good shape. None of the Apollo 7 pilots were put in isolation until 36 hours or so before liftoff. During Gemini, it was routine for pilots to live in the crew quarters in isolation for 5 to 7 days before a mission. Top doctors, including those in the space agency, now acknowledge they were wrong and declare they don't know how NASA overlooked protecting the pilots. Jeopardizing flights costing hundreds of millions of dollars is ludicrous. The built-in risks of space exploration are already big enough.
And so rest assured, pilots will live in protective quarters before future Apollo flights. This is Jules Bergman.
Last night we reported on a young Air Force enlisted man who took part in a San Francisco anti-war parade wearing his uniform, although he knew this would subject him to official discipline. Well, today, Airman First Class Michael Locks has been restricted to Hamilton Air Force Base for knowingly violating regulations. He has 72 hours to decide whether to accept punishment decreed by his commanding officer or to request a court-martial. In a moment, highlights of today's Olympic competition.
Helen, I've got the solution.
Not a padded bra.
No, this is slightly padded.
Slightly padded?
Just a 1/16 of an inch lining. Adds shaping, not inches. And it's a Playtex Cross Your Heart. You know, crosses your heart with stretch, lifts, separates, you're suddenly shapelier.
1/16 of an inch?
Adds shaping, not inches.
The new Playtex Cross Your Heart slightly padded bra. Sometimes a little can do a lot.
That's the hard way to be firm and flatter. The easy way, the Firm and Flatter Lycra Girdle by Playtex. Firms and flatters as no other girdle can. The exclusive V construction exercises two firming, flattering forces. These elastic V bands lift your tummy in. These elastic bands keep your waistline thin. You're firmer, you're flatter in the Playtex Firm and Flatter Girdle made with Lycra.
The Summer Olympics went into the fourth day of competition today, with the United States leading with 8 medals, but with a disappointment in one of the field events. ABC's Chris Schenkel reports from Mexico City.
Hal Conley. He's 37 years.
The story of the Olympics thus far today has been the qualifying in the hammer throw, when Olympic veteran Harold Conley, the 1956 gold medal winner, was trying to make the finals. Perry O'Brien reports the action.
Keith, here is Hal Conley when the pressure is the greatest. Let's hope that he does qualify. He's getting ready for the big effort. This is his last chance to get into the finals. There he is at the back of the circle, utilizing the squat position that is very indicative of his form. There he is, making his turns, giving it a great effort. Now, there it is. He throw looked technically all right. However, by looking at the lines here, it's a little bit short, Keith.
The end of an extraordinary career, Harold Conley. Al Hall also failed to make the finals. However, Ed Burke of the United States will be in the final competition. The big event later today here in Mexico City will be the finals of the pole vault, when world champion Bob Segrin will try to win the gold medal. He has the world record at 17 feet 9 inches. Earlier today, in qualifying, we had an opportunity to see the form, the style, and the appearance of Bob Segrin as he is ready on the ramp to make his move toward the bar, which is set at 16 feet 6 3/4 inches. This was his first try today. And as you can see, he had plenty to spare. And tonight on ABC, you'll see whether he's able to win the gold medal and get near his world record of 17.9. And another highlight of our shows will be the 200-meter finals featuring Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and Larry Quistad. The first show at 7 Eastern Time, 6 Central, and again at 8 Eastern and 7 Central. Chris Schenkel reporting from Mexico City.
Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union signed the agreement in Prague tonight, legalizing the presence of Soviet occupation troops in Czechoslovakia. The treaty means the official end of Czech attempts at liberal reform. Soviet Premier Alexei Kosygin flew from Moscow to sign the treaty with Czech Premier Oldrich Černík. Observers believe the Soviets will withdraw the bulk of their troops before October 28th, the 50th anniversary of Czechoslovakia, and this will still leave about 20,000 troops along the Czech western border. Hurricane warnings are up for the Tampa Bay area of Florida, with the prediction that Hurricane Gladys will push across from Cuba by late tomorrow. 80-mile-an-hour winds swept across Cuba's Isle of Pines this afternoon, forcing thousands to take refuge on higher ground. The Nobel Prize for Medicine was awarded to 3 Americans today for new findings in the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis. The 3 scientists worked on the problem independently of each other, but they achieved their common goal. The $70,000 cash prize will be divided among Robert Holley of Cornell University, H. Gobind Khorana of the University of Wisconsin, and Marshall Nirenberg of the National Institute of Health. Hubert Humphrey finds himself running against still another tough candidate, Winnie the Pooh. That report in a moment.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?
Oh, they're all so pretty. I can't decide which one to use for the cover.
That's the one.
Mm-hmm. And this one on the first page of the article.
Good. Hey, you just lit that cigarette.
Oh, they lose their taste.
Here. Never happens with these.
Oh, thank you. Viceroy. Why are they different?
Just always tastes good. Taste never quits.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate your help with this.
Well, one picture's worth 1,000 words.
You know this Viceroy is good.
Taste never quits.
Fine tobaccos are perfectly matched with the Viceroy filter to make sure the good taste never quits. King size or new extra length Viceroy filter longs. Either way, the good taste never quits.
Vice President Humphrey campaigned among some future voters yesterday and found himself in tough competition. Mr. Humphrey had taped a 30-minute news-type interview at KMBC TV in Kansas City, and when he finished, he dropped in on a children's show then in progress. The youngsters were being taught politics by their mentor, Torrey Southwick.
We have been campaigning for another presidential candidate around here. I might as well tell you the truth.
Yes, I was afraid of that.
You tell him who?
Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh.
Oh, I'm for Winnie the Pooh.
Well, I don't really think he's too serious about it.
Oh, well, listen, he's one of my favorites. He almost makes more sense than anybody.
That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.
Through Friday, in color, the ABC Evening News with Frank Reynolds. And a welcome tonight to station KPLM in Palm Springs, California, the newest member of the ABC network. This has been a presentation of ABC News.